My husband and his mother kicked me out. Unaware I just inherited $30 million from my grandma. Now a millionaire and was about to destroy them. If you're just tuning in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. And please show us some love with a like and comment below to let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from all over the world. The rain hammered against the windows like bullets, each drop echoing the chaos brewing inside the modest two-bedroom apartment. She clutched the eviction notice with trembling fingers, her wedding ring catching the dim overhead light, a cruel reminder of promises broken and dreams shattered. The paper felt heavy, heavier than it should have, weighted with 3 years of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional warfare. "You heard what Mama said," Louis's voice cut through the thunder, cold and final. "Pack your things. You got until morning." His mother, Teresa, stood behind him like a general commanding her troops, her arms crossed, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. The woman had orchestrated this moment from day one, chipping away at their marriage with surgical precision. "Louis, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We took vows. Before God, we—" "Don't you dare bring God into this," Teresa spat, stepping forward. "You've been nothing but dead weight since you walked into our lives. No job, no money, no respect. My son deserves better than some project girl who can't even contribute to the household." The words sliced through her like razors. 3 years of being the perfect wife, cooking, cleaning, sacrificing her own dreams to support Louis's failing business ventures, all reduced to nothing. She looked at her husband, searching for any trace of the man who once promised to love and protect her. Instead, she found a stranger wearing his face. Thunder crashed overhead as if the heavens themselves were witnessing this betrayal. Little did they know, the storm outside was nothing compared to the hurricane about to unleash upon their lives. In her purse, unread, lay a certified letter that would change everything. The game was about to begin, and she didn't even know she held all the winning cards. The grandmother's house stood like a monument to forgotten dreams, its Victorian architecture defying time itself. Julia sat on the front porch steps, rain-soaked and hollow, staring at the letter that had arrived that morning. Her grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had tracked her down through old addresses, his message simple yet earth-shattering: "Your grandmother has left you something significant." Inside the musty parlor, surrounded by antique furniture and family photographs, Mr. Harrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Washington, your grandmother Ruth was quite particular about her final wishes." He opened a leather portfolio, revealing documents that would make most people's hands shake. "She left you her entire estate, including properties, investments, and liquid assets totaling $30 million. Julia's world tilted. The grandmother who had raised her until age 12, who had been forced to give her up when social services intervened, had been watching from afar all these years. "She knew," Julia whispered, touching a photograph of herself as a child. "She knew what I was going through. More than you realize," Mr. Harrison continued. "She hired investigators to keep tabs on your life. She knew about Louis, about his mother, about the emotional abuse. This inheritance comes with specific instructions." He slid another document across the mahogany table. "She wanted you to have the power to protect yourself and, if necessary, to ensure those who hurt you face consequences." Ruth's handwriting filled the margins of her will. "Baby girl, strength isn't about enduring pain. It's about having the power to stop it. Use this gift wisely, but use it boldly." Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time it sounded like applause. The meek, broken woman who had been cast out into the storm was about to rise from the ashes like a phoenix, and hell itself was about to follow. Julia stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new penthouse suite, the city sprawling beneath her like a chessboard waiting for her first move. The transformation had been swift. Designer clothes replaced her thrift store wardrobe. A personal stylist had crafted her image, and the best legal team money could buy was already mobilizing. But beneath the designer facade, something primal burned. Her new assistant, Ophelia, entered with military precision. "The reports you requested, ma'am." The young woman had been handpicked, brilliant, ruthless, and hungry for success. Ophelia laid out detailed dossiers on Louis and Teresa like a general planning a siege. "Louis owes $78,000 in business debt," Ophelia reported, her voice clinical. "His mother's been hiding assets, transferring property to relatives to avoid creditors. They think they're untouchable, She slid photographs across the glass table. But here's where it gets interesting. The apartment they threw you out of? Teresa doesn't own it. She's been subletting illegally for 2 years. Julia's fingers traced the documents, each page revealing deeper layers of deception. These people had built their arrogance on a foundation of lies, and she was about to introduce them to the concept of consequences. Her phone buzzed, a text from Louis. "Julia, baby, maybe we were too harsh. Come home. We can work this out." The audacity made her laugh, a sound cold enough to freeze summer rain. "Phase 1, she told Ophelia, her voice carrying a new authority that commanded rooms and ended arguments. "I want them to feel secure, comfortable, untouchable. Let them think they've won." She turned from the window, her reflection showing someone Louis wouldn't recognize, someone his mother would fear. "And then?" Ophelia asked, already knowing the answer. "Then we remind them that every kingdom built on lies eventually falls." Louis adjusted his tie in the mirror, practicing his smile for the 5th time. The call had come that morning. Julia wanted to meet to discuss their future. Teresa paced behind him like a caged predator, her instincts screaming warnings her greed refused to hear. "Something ain't right about this," she muttered, wringing her hands. "That girl don't just disappear for 2 weeks and come back talking about wanting to reconcile. Where's she been staying? How's she eating?" "Mama, you worry too much," Louis said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Maybe she learned her lesson. Maybe she realizes what she lost. The restaurant Julia had chosen was upscale, the kind of place that required reservations weeks in advance. When they arrived, she was already seated at a corner table and Louis felt his breath catch. Gone was the broken woman they had discarded. In her place sat someone who commanded attention without demanding it. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless. Her dress probably cost more than his car payment. "Hello, Louis." "Teresa." Julia's voice carried new weight, each word measured and deliberate. She gestured to the empty chairs across from her. "Please sit. We have so much to discuss." Teresa's eyes narrowed as she took in the expensive jewelry, the designer handbag, the subtle but unmistakable signs of wealth. "Where'd you get money for all this?" Julia smiled, the expression beautiful and terrifying. "Does it matter? I'm here to offer you both something precious, a chance to make things right." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I know about the debts, Louis. About the illegal subletting, Teresa. About the asset transfers, the tax evasion, all of it." The color drained from their faces as understanding dawned. They hadn't just kicked out a desperate woman. They had awakened something far more dangerous. Julia raised her wine glass in a mock toast. "To new beginnings," she said, her smile never wavering. "And to learning that some bridges once burned leave you stranded in hell." Teresa sat in her lawyer's office, the cheap fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her weathered face. Attorney Bernard Mills, a public defender turned private practice, reviewed the papers with growing alarm. His hands shook as he read each document, his professional composure cracking like ice in summer heat. "Mrs. Johnson, these charges are extensive." He looked up, his eyes filled with something between pity and professional dread. "Wire fraud, tax evasion, illegal subletting, asset concealment. They're not just coming for your freedom. They're coming for everything you own." "This is that girl's doing," Teresa snarled, her voice hoarse from 3 sleepless nights. "That ungrateful little—" "Ma'am," Mills interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "The evidence here isn't circumstantial. They have bank records, witness statements, recorded conversations. Someone with serious resources has been building this case for weeks." Meanwhile, across town, Louis sat in his truck outside his former workplace, termination papers crumpled in his fist. The call had come at 7 a.m. His employer had received an anonymous tip about his falsified work history, the fabricated references, the stolen company property he'd been selling online. Everything unraveled in the span of one conversation. His phone buzzed with another text from Julia. "Meet me at Riverside Park. Come alone. We need to talk about your future." The park was empty except for joggers and dog walkers, the afternoon sun filtering through autumn leaves like scattered gold coins. Julia sat on a bench overlooking the river, feeding ducks from a bag of breadcrumbs. She looked peaceful, almost serene, like someone who had finally found inner balance. "You destroyed my life," Louis said, his voice breaking as he approached. Did I? Julia didn't look up, just continued feeding the ducks. Or did I simply reveal what was already there? The rot, the lies, the casual cruelty you both mistook for strength? She finally turned to face him, and Louis saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. This wasn't revenge. This was justice, methodical and absolute. The law office of Sterling, Hayes and Associates occupied the entire 40th floor of downtown's most prestigious building. Julia sat across from senior partner Victoria Sterling, a woman whose reputation for ruthless litigation had made her a legend in legal circles. Between them lay a contract that would reshape lives and destroy futures. The terms are quite generous, Victoria said, her voice carrying the weight of courtroom victories and shattered opponents. Full immunity from prosecution, debt forgiveness, and a $100,000 settlement each. All they have to do is sign these documents and disappear from your life forever. Julia studied the papers, each clause crafted with surgical precision. And if they refuse? Then we proceed with the criminal charges, the civil suits, and the asset seizure proceedings. Conservative estimate, they'll be in federal prison for 8 to 12 years, assuming they can afford adequate representation. The conference room door opened and Louis entered with Teresa, both looking like they'd aged a decade in the past week. Their cheap suits and desperate expressions were almost comical against the backdrop of marble columns and priceless artwork. You summoned us, Teresa said, her voice dripping with manufactured defiance. What do you want? Julia gestured to the chairs across from her. I want to offer you mercy. She slid the contracts across the polished table. Sign these, take the money, and start new lives somewhere far from here. Or don't, and spend the next decade fighting charges that will destroy you both. Louis picked up the contract, his hands trembling as he read. This says we can never contact you again, never speak about you publicly, never hurt anyone the way you hurt me, Julia finished. Consider it a graduation requirement from the school of hard knocks you both enrolled me in. The room fell silent except for the soft tick of an antique clock. Outside, the city pulsed with life and possibility. But inside this room, two souls faced a choice that would define their remaining years. Teresa's eyes filled with hate as she reached for the pen. You think you won? Julia's smile was radiant and cold. I think I survived. Everything else is just paperwork. The private investigator's report lay spread across Julia's dining table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, finally revealing its complete picture. Carmen Coleman, a former FBI agent turned private investigator, sat across from her with the intensity of someone accustomed to unraveling complex mysteries. Your grandmother didn't just leave you money, Carmen said, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking signs. She left you a weapon forged over decades. Ruth Washington was nobody's fool. She built this fortune specifically to protect you from people like Louis and his mother. The documents revealed a truth more complex than simple inheritance. Ruth had been watching, documenting, and planning since the day social services took Julia away. Every business venture that failed around Louis, every job opportunity that mysteriously disappeared for Teresa, Ruth's invisible hand had been orchestrating their downfall for years. She knew you'd end up with someone like him, Carmen continued, pulling up surveillance photos on her laptop. Weak men attracted to strong women they want to break. She prepared for it. The screen showed Louis meeting with loan sharks, Teresa falsifying documents, both of them living in a house of cards that was always destined to collapse. Julia felt tears threatening but pushed them back. She let me suffer. Why didn't she just take me away from them? Because you needed to be strong enough to handle what she was giving you, Carmen replied. Money without wisdom is just another prison. She needed you to understand what real evil looked like before she handed you the power to fight it. The final folder contained something that made Julia's blood run cold. Adoption papers signed but never filed. Louis wasn't just her husband. He was someone Teresa had specifically positioned to enter her life. The entire relationship had been a long con, designed to get access to any inheritance Julia might receive. Outside, storm clouds gathered again, but this time Julia welcomed them. She understood now she wasn't just rich. She was armed, dangerous, and finally ready to finish what her grandmother had started years ago. The real war was about to begin. Detective Raymond Carter adjusted his reading glasses as he reviewed the case file that had landed on his desk that morning. 23 years in homicide had taught him to recognize patterns. And the Lewis Johnson case was lighting up every instinct he'd developed over 2 decades of hunting predators. "This ain't random," he muttered to his partner, Detective Lisa Park. 3 women in 5 years, all the same profile. Vulnerable, isolated, with older female relatives who had money. All 3 died in accidents shortly after their marriages fell apart. Park pulled up the photos on her computer screen. Sarah Liddell, 2019. Fell downstairs after filing for divorce. Her aunt had left her a house in California. Jennifer Williams, 2021. Car accident 2 days after she inherited her mother's life insurance. And now we got Julia Washington, who apparently inherited $30 million, and suddenly her husband's world implodes. The evidence room felt cold as they laid out the case files side by side. Lewis Johnson wasn't just an abusive husband. He was a serial predator who specialized in widow farming, finding vulnerable women with wealthy older relatives and positioning himself to cash in when those relatives died. "Look at this," Park said, pointing to financial records. Each woman had their inheritance tied up in joint accounts within weeks of receiving it. Each one died before they could access the money independently. Carter's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Detective Carter, I believe you're investigating my husband, Lewis Johnson. I have information that might interest you. Can we meet? KW." He looked at Park, who was already reaching for her jacket. "Looks like our mystery millionaire wants to play." "Question is," Park replied, checking her weapon, "is she the next victim or something else entirely?" As they drove through the city streets, neither detective noticed the black sedan that had been following them for the past 3 blocks, or the woman behind the wheel whose face had been surgically altered just enough to avoid recognition. Some ghosts, it seemed, weren't ready to stay buried. The hunter was about to meet the hunted, but the roles weren't what anyone expected. The woman behind the wheel of the black sedan had been dead for 2 years, at least according to the death certificate filed in the state records. Jennifer Williams, supposedly killed in a car accident in 2021, sat in the parking garage beneath the police station, watching Detectives Carter and Park enter the building. Her hands, scarred from the accident she had orchestrated to fake her own death, gripped the steering wheel as she dialed a number she'd memorized but never thought she'd use. "Julia Washington," the voice answered, crisp and professional. "My name is Jennifer Williams," she said, her voice hoarse from 2 years of hiding. "And I need to tell you about your husband before he kills you like he tried to kill me." The silence on the other end stretched for eternity before Julia spoke again. "The Jennifer Williams who died in a car accident? The Jennifer Williams who barely survived one. We need to meet. Tonight. And we need to bring the others." "Others?" Jennifer's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Did you really think you were his first? Sarah Liddell didn't fall down those stairs and I didn't crash that car. We both had help. From someone who wanted us dead and our inheritances in his hands." 2 hours later, they sat in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Sarah Liddell emerged from the shadows, her left arm still in a brace from injuries that were supposed to have killed her. The 3 women formed a triangle of survival, each carrying scars that told the same story. Lewis Johnson was a predator who specialized in hunting inheritances, and Teresa was his hunting partner. "He's done this before us," Sarah said, pulling out a manila folder thick with documentation. "We found at least 6 other women over the past decade. Some weren't lucky enough to survive their accidents." Julia felt the weight of her grandmother's inheritance differently now, not just as money but as ammunition in a war that had been going on for years. These women weren't just survivors. They were soldiers in an army she didn't know she'd been recruited to lead. "So what do we do?" Jennifer asked. Julia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "We give him exactly what he's been looking for, a final payday he'll never forget." The war room in Julia's penthouse had been transformed into a command center that would make military strategists proud. 3 large monitors displayed everything they'd gathered on Lewis and Teresa, while whiteboards covered in photos, timelines, and connection diagrams lined the walls. Sarah Liddell sat at a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she tracked financial records that went back 15 years. "This is bigger than we thought," Sarah announced, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Lewis isn't working alone. He's part of a network, at least 12 men across 4 states, all using the same playbook. They target women with elderly relatives, build relationships, Then cash in when the inheritance comes through. Jennifer Williams paced near the windows, her movements sharp and predatory. 2 years of hiding had turned her into something dangerous. I found the woman who recruited him, she said, sliding a photograph across the table. Meet Teresa Johnson's sister, Patricia. She runs a matchmaking service that specializes in connecting vulnerable women with caring men. The photograph showed a woman in her 60s, well-dressed and respectable-looking, the kind of person who would never raise suspicions. But her eyes held the same cold calculation they'd all learned to recognize in Teresa. They're franchising murder, Julia said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. How many women died while we were playing victim? Carmen Coleman entered the room carrying another box of files. According to my contacts at the FBI, at least 23 women over the past decade. All ruled accidents or suicides. All had recent inheritances or insurance policies. All had husbands who fit Lewis's profile. The room fell silent as the magnitude of their discovery settled over them. They weren't just 3 survivors seeking justice. They were the front line in a war against a sophisticated network of predators who had been perfecting their methods for years. We need to be smart about this, Jennifer said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived the impossible. We can't just expose Lewis. We need to burn down the entire network. Julia looked at her reflection in the window, seeing not just herself but all the women who hadn't made it this far. Then that's what we do. We burn it all down and make sure nothing grows back. Lewis stood in the center of his empty apartment, surrounded by boxes and the echoes of his former life. The eviction notice on the door gave him 72 hours, but he suspected he had much less time than that. His phone had been buzzing all morning with calls from numbers he didn't recognize, and each voicemail carried the same message: "We know what you did." Teresa sat on the last remaining chair, her face gaunt and hollow. The past month had aged her a decade, turning her from a commanding presence into something fragile and broken. "She's coming for us," she whispered, clutching a rosary that seemed inadequate against the forces arrayed against them. "We still got Patricia," Lewis said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. "She's got connections, resources. She can get us out of the country." "Patricia's dead," Teresa replied, her voice flat. "Found her this morning. Apparent suicide, they said. Left a note confessing to everything." The blood drained from Lewis's face as he understood the implications. Their entire network was collapsing, each member either arrested, dead, or disappeared. Someone with serious resources and unlimited patience was systematically dismantling everything they'd built over 15 years. His phone rang and Julia's name appeared on the screen. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, he answered. "Hello, Lewis." Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. "Having a difficult day? What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to understand something important," she replied. "When you chose to hurt me, you chose to hurt someone protected by forces you couldn't possibly comprehend. My grandmother didn't just leave me money, she left me an army." Through the window, Lewis could see black SUVs surrounding the building. Men in expensive suits were entering the lobby, their movements coordinated and professional. "FBI," Julia continued as if reading his mind, "along with representatives from several other agencies. They're very interested in discussing your business practices over the past decade." Lewis felt his legs give out as he sank to the floor. "Please," he whispered. "I'll do anything." "You already did," Julia replied. "You taught me that mercy is weakness. Thank you for the lesson." The line went dead as the first knock echoed through the apartment. The federal courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras as Lewis Johnson was led away in handcuffs. His orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the designer suits he'd once worn to prey on vulnerable women. The judge's voice still echoed in Julia's mind. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Teresa hadn't lived to see this day. The stress and guilt had caught up with her 3 weeks into the trial, and she died of a heart attack in her jail cell, clutching the same rosary she'd held during their last conversation. Some might call it poetic justice. Julia preferred to think of it as mercy. Detective Carter approached her as the crowd began to disperse. 37 arrests across 4 states, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. "The largest marriage fraud ring in federal history. You and your friends saved a lot of lives." Sarah Liddell and Jennifer Williams stood beside her, no longer hiding in shadows but standing in full sunlight for the first time in years. They'd become more than survivors. They'd become advocates, using their experiences to help other women recognize the warning signs of predatory relationships. "What's next for you?" Detective Park asked, joining the small group. Julia looked up at the courthouse, then back at the city that had been her battlefield. "I'm starting a foundation," she said. "The Ruth Washington Foundation for Women's Safety. We're going to make sure no woman ever has to face what we faced alone." As they walked away from the courthouse, Julia felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. The inheritance hadn't just been about money. It had been about transformation, about turning pain into purpose and weakness into strength. Behind them, the courthouse clock struck noon, marking not just the end of a trial but the beginning of something new. The broken woman who had been cast out into the storm was gone forever, replaced by someone who would ensure that other women never had to endure that same darkness. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. 1 year later, Julia stood before a room filled with survivors, their faces reflecting journeys through darkness into light. The Ruth Washington Foundation had grown beyond her wildest dreams, with offices in 12 cities and a network of support that reached thousands of women. The wall behind her was covered with photographs, not of victims, but of warriors who had reclaimed their lives. "My grandmother used to tell me that some people are born to endure," Julia said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed auditorium. But she was wrong. "We're not born to endure, we're born to overcome." In the audience, Sarah Liddell, now the Foundation's Director of Survivor Services, smiled through tears. Jennifer Williams, leading the Legal Advocacy Division, nodded her approval. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of their trauma, something that would outlive them all. The Foundation's latest report showed staggering results. Over 200 women safely removed from predatory relationships, 15 marriage fraud networks dismantled, and a database that law enforcement agencies nationwide used to track patterns of financial abuse. What had started as personal revenge had evolved into systematic change. After the presentation, Julia walked to her grandmother's grave, carrying flowers and a copy of the Foundation's annual report. The headstone was simple. "Ruth Washington, she prepared the way." "I understand now," Julia whispered, placing the flowers on the granite surface. "You didn't save me from the storm. You taught me to become the storm." The setting sun painted the cemetery in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment, Julia could swear she heard her grandmother's laughter carried on the evening breeze. The scared young woman who had once begged for mercy was gone, replaced by someone who gave strength to others. As she walked back to her car, Julia's phone buzzed with a message from another survivor seeking help. She smiled, started the engine, and drove toward whatever battle awaited her next. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and she was never going back down. The war was won, but the mission continued. Forever. Thanks for watching. Give us a like if you liked the video and share with us in the comments what you think about this lovely tale. We always enjoy reading your comments.